Hi, welcome to Fostering Resilience. I'm Dr. KJ Foster. If this is your very first time clicking on one of my videos, welcome. My channel and my videos are dedicated to supporting individuals who are recovering from substance use disorders and other addictions, trauma, and other mental health issues, and their family members. I also, of late, have been creating videos about my husband and I, our transition from the US to France. We are leaving our jobs as of October 1st. We both work at a treatment center, have both been working in the field for many, many years. Myself, 10 years. My husband, 6 plus years. He's approaching 20 years of sobriety in October. And pretty much almost the entire time since he left treatment, so let's just say probably 17, 18 years, he's been working in the field as well. We are transitioning to a much slower paced lifestyle in France, and we are super excited about it. So I've been posting some videos about that transition as well. And as a part of that, if you've been watching the videos, then you're getting to know a little bit about my husband, who has not been really involved in this YouTube channel for the 4 years that I have been creating videos. So now that he is retiring, he's going to be able to do things like tell his story and also contribute some videos of his own. And so today is the beginning of that. And this is interesting because this is something that we have talked about him doing for the longest time over the years. And he's so busy. I'm so busy. We've never been able to really pin it down and have him tell his story. And we've talked about it a lot lately, and it seems to be our schedules haven't synced up. And then what he did is he went and he surprised me on Monday when I was in session in our private practice. I came home and he had filmed the video all by himself. He's not used to doing this, just to let you know, but he did a great job. I'm so proud of him. And this is his story. This is his story of recovery. So I hope that you enjoy it.
My name's Tony. I'm an alcoholic. KJ has asked me to tell you my story as I approach my 20th anniversary. And as many of you know, we're retiring and moving to France. And we're actually leaving for France on my 20th anniversary. So to get into my story, I was born in Montevideo, Uruguay, 65 years ago. The son of two parents who were both heavy drinkers. My mother, though, could control her drinking. My father could not. And I often say that I was bred to be an alcoholic. My father, at that period of his life, drank only on weekends, but on weekends he would be trashed from Friday night until Monday morning, and virtually every Monday morning he went to work hungover. My mother didn't drink as much as he did, but when she drank to greater extent than him, and then drove him home. My father was so committed to his alcoholism that he never got a driver's license. So she would drive him to the bar and sit at one end with the wives, and he'd sit at the other end with his friends, and she'd drink whiskey, he'd usually drink beer, and when he got too drunk and got in a fight with somebody, she'd take him home. And that era of people were not, it was not cool to have your wife out drink you and basically rescue you every time you got too drunk to stay and have a few more. So into that world I came. I had an older sister who, perhaps because of that world, probably didn't have 5 drinks in her entire life. She died about 5 years ago, and did not drink at all. And actually, my sister escaped the house, and I say escaped not lightly. She escaped the house right after she turned 18, got married and had an incredibly happy marriage. She married a man who was just loving, and they had 3 kids together. And unfortunately, 5 years ago, she died of cancer, but she had one of the happiest marriages I ever saw. No alcohol at all. So, I find through my years of sobriety and being involved in treatment centers and working with clients that the reaction to alcoholic parents is usually extreme. Either you become just like them or worse, like I did, or you don't drink at all, like my sister did. And so we moved from Uruguay to England when I was 8 years old, and we spent a year and a half in England. And then in 1966, my father was offered 2 jobs, one in Brazil and another one in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And that's how we emigrated. He left it up to my mother and my sister and I to agree on which one we wanted to go to. And my mother was from Montreal, and Bridgeport was a 6-hour drive from Montreal. So that's why we moved to Bridgeport. And so on July 1st, 1966, after getting air sickness and throwing up on a flight here from London, I came to America as a 9-year-old with a British accent who knew nothing about American sports, but was very involved in soccer in both Uruguay and in England. And my father once said his greatest regret was that we moved to the United States at a time when soccer was not big here yet. And in South America, I was somewhat of a prodigy as a soccer player, playing in adult leagues at 8 years old, and holding my own, if not better, at that time. And so when we came here, I was 9, I had to learn about baseball and American football and basketball and things like that. And the kids are very adaptable, so I learned pretty quick. And so at 10, I joined the Little League, really not knowing what I was doing, but progressing quickly. And that's what the kids in the neighborhood did. They played Little League baseball, so I did too. And this was where my father's drinking was really starting to get worse. And he would come to my games, and he had this big, booming English accent, and he'd be in the crowd drunk, and he would be cursing at the umpires. And in 1967, cursing isn't what it is today. Today it's part of everyday discussion, but back in those days, the words that he was using were very verboten with kids around. And he embarrassed me every time he came, and it was the beginning of me saying, not just to myself, to him and to my mother, I'm never going to be like him. And of course, I became perhaps worse than him and did some of the things that he did to embarrass my son. So as time went on, I ended up playing high school soccer as soccer became more popular here. And we're talking about the early to mid 70s, where it still wasn't what it is today, but it was starting to become something. And I ended up doing well my junior and senior year of playing, and got soccer scholarships, and ended up going to a college on a soccer scholarship. And my father said to me when I was leaving for my first day of school, he said, I don't really care how well you do in school, I only care that you play well. And if you tell an 18-year-old kid that, what's he going to do? So I didn't go to class. And at the end of the first semester, I had a 1.8 GPA and lost my scholarship. And drinking had not yet become a problem. Drinking was not a problem for me in college. And I should go back and tell you that my first drink in earnest, I had a sip of beer from my father from time to time, but my first drink for the purpose of drinking and enjoying myself was with a group of friends on a street corner in Bridgeport, Connecticut. We each chipped in 25 cents because a bottle of Boone's Farm apple wine was $1 back in those days. And so I bought a bottle of Boone's Farm. Actually, I didn't buy it. We convinced somebody on the way into the package store to buy us a bottle, and the four of us stood out on the corner, and I bet the rest of them that I could drink the bottle in one sip. And the bet was if I drink it in one sip, they buy another bottle for us, and if I don't, then I have to buy a bottle for the group. And I drank it in one sip, and then I threw up. And I demanded the second bottle because I had drank it. And had I known then what I know now, I would have known that this was a red flag for alcoholic type of behavior, or early alcoholic type of behavior. And so they went and got another bottle somehow, and we drank it. But again, to go back to what I said before, alcohol was not an issue for me in my college years, my teen years, or even immediately after college. So I ended up, between my first semester and my second semester, I had to get my GPA up to 2.0, and if I didn't get my GPA up to 2.0, not only have I lost my scholarship, but I would be asked to leave the school. So I was on probation. And I was a political science major at the time, and I walked into an economics class, and in that class was a girl who had been the valedictorian in my high school. And she was a very serious student. In fact, she had gotten a scholarship to Yale and turned it down because her parents were getting a divorce and she wanted to stay near her mother. And she ended up becoming a school teacher. But anyway, she was somebody I knew in the class, and I sat next to her and we talked a little bit. And I had known her since I'd come to the United States. We'd actually gone to grammar school and junior high school and high school together, but never interacted that much. But at that point in her life, she was very intelligent, hardworking. I'm sure she still is both of those things. And we started dating. And this went on for quite a while, but she said to me very early in our relationship, you know, if you and I are gonna be together, you got to do something about your grades, and you got to work on your grades. And so we decided, at her urging, that 2 nights a week we would study together, and I would do my homework, she would do her homework, and that's what we did. And shocking turn of events, if you turn in papers on time and you show up for exams having studied even a little bit, your grades go up. And so that second semester I had a 2.2 GPA, and I decided to switch my major to a business major. And I think in part because I thought political science was probably not for me. The economics class in particular, I wasn't too excited about it. But then, of course, in business, I had to take accounting classes I wasn't too excited about. But I switched to being a business major, and we kept on the same routine. And literally for the next 4 years, we would study together 2 nights a week, and my grades would go up. Of course, hers would stay at a 4.0, and my grades gradually went up, and by my junior year, I was making the dean's list. And so as my senior year came, people would start asking me every holiday, whether it was Christmas or her birthday, they'd say, so when are you guys getting engaged? And when are you guys going to get married? And because we've been together now 3+ years. And the truth of the matter is, I never seriously considered marrying her. And I'm not sure why. There's no really good reason why, because she was really very good for me. But there were some intangibles. She had the same childhood I did. She had a father who was an alcoholic, who actually drank in the same bar my father drank in, and they hated each other. And so I was able to relate to her a lot on that level. And I was also able to empathize with her mother a lot, because in a sense, she was just like my mother. And so never thought about getting married. And we come into our senior years of college, and of course she's going to be a math teacher and has been a math teacher now for 43 years, I think. I'm going to do one of two things. I'm considering going to law school because my grades had gotten up well enough to be able to do that. And I'm considering becoming a city of Bridgeport cop. And if you know anything about the city of Bridgeport, their crime rate is, around the top in the country. And, you don't hear a lot about Bridgeport like you do some other bigger cities, but it's a crime-infested city. I went to an inner-city high school, which was actually very good for me because I learned what life was really like. When I was making that decision, I took the LSATs, the law school aptitude test, and I also applied to the city of Bridgeport to be a cop. And about a week before my college graduation, I was headed towards school and had the morning paper in my hands and saw an article that they were going to actually hire something like 40 policemen. And that night in the mail, I had a letter from the city of Bridgeport saying, report in for your swear-in. And, I had gone through all the battery of tests and done okay. And so that had worked out for me. But at the same time, I got accepted in law school. And I chose law school. And in retrospect, I've been on this journey, and I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't hit every part of the journey. But the fact of the matter is, I didn't have the personality of a lawyer. I was not aggressive. My manner was not aggressive. I hated public speaking, and I probably would have made a much better cop than a lawyer. But I went to law school. I was driven by money, and that's the real reason I went. I didn't know any lawyers who didn't do very well, even though we know there's a lot of lawyers that don't, but I didn't know any of them. And so I went to law school, and I hated it. Right off the bat, I hated it. And my second semester of law school, I had to do something called moot court. And if there's any lawyers out there, you know what moot court's all about. And so I had to present a case in front of the entire school, which was, as I recall, about 600 people. And I was scared to death. I was petrified to the point that I was standing at the lectern and you could actually see my legs trembling inside my pants. And my voice was quavering. And I knew as I was presenting the case that I was presenting that I couldn't do this. But I refused to quit because, you see, my father wanted me to be a cop. And I wanted to be a lawyer, in part, if I'm honest, because I wanted the opposite of what he wanted me to be. My father and I, probably because of my personality, we disagreed on everything. So we lived in greater New York, the New York metropolitan area, so we were New York sports fans. So he was a Yankee fan, I was a Met fan. He was a Giant fan, I was a Jet fan. He was a Ranger fan, I was an Islander fan. And even in basketball, I was a Knick fan, he was a Net fan. No matter what it was, we thought the opposite. I loved Muhammad Ali as a kid. He liked Joe Frazier. So he said, be a cop. I said, I'm going to law school. And of course, I could justify that in my mind, and that's more education, I'm going to make more money, I'm going to be a pillar of the community, and all that BS, to be honest. So while I'm making this presentation, I come to this realization, and for a brief moment, I thought about walking out right then. And, I didn't want to be that guy, and I didn't want to quit, and I didn't want him to have that on me, because that's kind of what this was about at that moment. And so I kept going, but I hated it. And of course, I never became a lawyer. And I figured I'd fall back on my business degree because I had a business undergrad at that point. And I thought, I won't have to public speak. I'll just go to work for some large company. I'm not sure what I'll do, but that's what I'll do. And I will, get married, have 2.2 kids, and white picket fence and live happily ever after, and I won't ever have to public speak. So that was my intent. But around this time, in my first semester of law school, the fact that I got into law school and my grades had done what they had done, my ego was getting more and more inflated. And I have to tell you that every bad decision I've ever made in my life, every time I've regretted something in my life, my ego's been involved. And it's always coming from an ego perspective. So I one day thought to myself, after being told by so many people, "Are you getting married? Are you getting married? When are you getting married? When are you getting engaged? Did you buy her a ring?" I finally sat down and had a conversation with myself. And I said to myself, could you see yourself 10 years from now being married to this woman? And again, this woman was a wonderful woman. But I thought, she was violently opposed to alcohol. At this point, I was drinking a little bit, but not enough to cause trouble. But she was, and I say violently, that's too strong of a word, but she was strongly opposed to alcohol because of the way her father was. And she thought I should be the same way because the way my father was. And I was kind of growing out of that a little bit. And maybe the alcoholic in me was starting to come out. So I thought, if I ever marry this woman, we're going to end up divorced. And that's the conclusion I came to. And so I didn't have the courage to say that to her. So I actually said to her, I think that we should probably see other people. What do you think? And this is after 4 years of dating. And I in my heart of hearts, thought she was going to say, no, we're going to be okay. We're going to end up getting married and blah, 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 blah. But she said, yes, I think you're right. And I was brokenhearted. And she almost immediately started dating a friend of mine and he was more of an acquaintance than a friend. But I had gone to my first 2 years of high school with him at a different high school than the one she went to. And he was an all-American guy, good guy, very good guy. And she started dating him. They got married, and now they've been married probably 40 years, although I'm not sure how that's turned out. I have had no contact with her since we broke up, but it changed me. It really did. And in the sense that it broke my heart, and my first marriage was really lived in the shadow of my relationship with her virtually the whole time. So while we're broken up and I'm deciding not to become a lawyer, I end up getting a job working for the Southland Corporation, the company that owns all the 7-Eleven stores. And after 3 months of running a store, because everybody has to do that first, I ended up operating 9 7-Elevens as an area supervisor, and then got promoted into the franchising department. And this is where my legal background did help. Not that I did legal work, but I was monitoring franchise agreements and making sure that people were adhering to them, and also making sure that franchise agreements were being signed at appropriate times and all that sort of thing. And it was an interesting job, and I did that for a couple of years, and I got recruited to work for a small company in the Chicago area. But before that happened, while I was working at 7-Eleven, I met a woman who I started dating, and I hear a lot in AA meetings that we take people hostage, and I never thought of myself as a hostage taker. But I think certainly for the first 3 or 4 years of our relationship, I was a hostage taker with her. My mind was still wrapped up in the previous young lady, and here I was asking this woman to go out, becoming significantly involved with her, and ultimately getting engaged and getting married to her. And that marriage lasted 26 years. And I think the reason we got along so well is because she and I had the same financial interests. She wanted to make a lot of money. I wanted to make a lot of money. And so as we get married and I get recruited to this job in Northwest Indiana, in Valparaiso, Indiana, and she opens up a picture frame shop because she was very artistic, and she did really well in that frame shop. And I end up finally going to work for the company that owns all the Arby's restaurants. And along the way, my drinking has grown. I should tell you that at 7-Eleven, I used to have to make a presentation once a month to about 50 or 60 people, including a regional vice president. At one point, about how my 9 stores were doing, and then as I got promoted, how the franchising opportunities were going and where people were growing and where they weren't, and that sort of thing. And I was still scared to death. And now we're talking about the late 70s and early 80s, and I'm scared I remember it was on Thursday morning. Every Thursday morning, the first Thursday of the month, I was on at 11 o'clock. It was kind of a standard thing. And this particular Thursday, the regional vice president, got delayed for some reason, and I was pushed off to 1:30. And I didn't even think about that, other than my anxiety just had a couple hours more to wait for me to present. And over lunch that day, I had a couple of drinks. And I don't mean a couple of drinks like, late stage alcoholic, couple of drinks meaning 20. I mean, I literally had a couple of drinks, just enough to take the edge off. And 1:30 came and I made my presentation, and all of a sudden I could talk to 100 people, 1,000 people, it didn't matter. All of a sudden, it's like I was free. My whole time at 7-Eleven, I thought I could be very successful if I could get over this. And alcohol became my magic elixir. And so that's how I managed my career. And so I end up at Arby's, and similar situation, I'm making presentations a lot, but now I've got alcohol to manage my presentations. And unless I am forced to speak when I'm not expected to speak, it becomes pretty easy for me. But as you might imagine, over a period of time, the amount of alcohol grew. And 7-Eleven had been a partying company, Arby's was a partying company, and I just kept drinking more and more and more. And around this time, my mother came to live with us because she and my father had split up. She had finally had enough of him. He went back to England, and she got cancer. And they wanted to put her in a nursing home, and I asked the doctor, is there another option? And he said, well, she has to live with people. I said, well, let her move to Indiana and live with us. And as she physically improved, she took a bigger role in the household. She wasn't just the person watching TV in her room. She became my son's earliest babysitter. She became the person who did grocery shopping for us. And the reason I'm telling you this is because she also became my bartender. And by that I mean my mother made the most perfect Tanqueray and tonics of any I've ever had. And every night I'd get home when I wasn't traveling, and there'd be a pitcher of Tanqueray and tonics waiting for me. And when it got down to, a couple of inches, she'd do another one. And so unknowingly, the progression of my alcoholism is happening and I'm not even noticing. And so, but because it's a partying company and because I'm actually doing a really good job, I keep getting promoted. And I end up getting promoted. Arby's moved their corporate headquarters from Atlanta to Miami, and Miami Beach actually, and I got promoted to be vice president of franchising. I had become regional vice president, then a super regional vice president, then vice president of franchising, then vice president of franchising and development. And it got to the point where I was pretty much running the company. Arby's was very much driven by new store openings, and I was responsible for that. And I was responsible for managing the franchise royalties getting paid and other parts of it. And there, look, there was a lot of Arby's employees, but I had befriended the owner of Arby's. There were plenty of times we drank together. And so as I kept getting promoted, I would drink more. I'd have to make presentations at bigger and bigger presentations, and culminating in a time when I was at a convention in Las Vegas, and we had 2,000 people in the audience, and I was going to go on at 9 o'clock in the morning. And I got up at 4:30 to start drinking. So I had had the right amount of drinks. Now, as I had said earlier, the amount of drinks I needed was growing. And so I probably had 6 or 7 drinks by 8:45. And I went on and I was fine. But there's no way around the fact of knowing that you've had 6 or 7 drinks before 9 o'clock in the morning, and that's not a good thing to do. And about that time, the owner of the company started having legal issues, and he was forced to sell Arby's. And he owned 211 other companies besides Arby's, and had gotten in legal issues regarding his whole business empire. He had at one time been the richest man in the United States, and he ended up having to sell everything. And he was elderly, so he sold everything, and new owners came in who still own Arby's from then to now. And that was kind of, I wasn't laid off or anything like that. I stayed for about another year, and then I said, you know what, this is not the same company it was. It's not fun to work here anymore. It became the suits, so to speak. And not that I didn't like wearing suits and shirts and ties. I was that guy, but I didn't act that way. And so I left, and I took a job working for a small bagel chain in New York that wanted to go public. And because of my resume, what I'd accomplished at Arby's, which was part of a public company, I was very much in demand, and I was able to pretty much write my ticket to end up being the president and the CEO of this bagel chain, and to the point where I refused to leave Florida. And so I commuted to New York every Sunday night or Monday morning and flew back on Friday night. And they paid for it all, and they put me up for the week, and I had a really nice hotel that I kept over weekends even when I wasn't there. And so it was like having an apartment in New York, and it was great. But my drinking was progressing and progressing. See, I had nobody in New York that I really knew. What else was I going to do at night but drink? And my alcoholism kept progressing. Now, along the way, my mother died. On October 16th, 1990, my mother died. And that was the beginning of a 12-year tailspin for me. I cannot identify a single sober day in 12 years. And it progressively got worse and worse and worse. And so I would fly up to New York and be drinking all week and come home and drink all weekend. And my wife, who was pretty naive about alcoholism, because that wasn't who she was. She didn't know people who were alcoholics. So she didn't see the signs, and she told her friends, well, Tony's working very hard during the week. He needs the opportunity to blow off steam. And of course, she was doing great. She had another picture frame shop down here. She had sold the one in Indiana, and was doing well, and I was doing well. And so on the surface, there wasn't much to argue about. We had a son in January of 1988. And like I said, my mother was his first babysitter until she died in 1990. And then her mother moved in with us, and she initially went back and forth between Connecticut and Florida. Actually, initially it was Connecticut and Valparaiso, but then Connecticut and Florida, and eventually she moved in with us. And that was fine, because I was away so much. It kept my wife entertained and not having to feel lonely and that sort of thing. But as time went on, my drinking got worse and worse. And as this company was about to go public, I had to make presentations. Those of you that might have been involved in taking companies public, I had to do dog and pony shows, and I was speaking at a dinner with about 100 people, and I was told 9 glasses of wine before I went on. And I was on the stage and was walking around talking, and I know people say they drive better when they've had a couple of drinks, and they don't. I was speaking off the cuff very well. I was told afterwards how well it went, except for one part. In the middle of my talk, as I walked around the stage, I stepped off the stage, which was about 5 feet off the ground, into the crowd, and caught myself as I was about to step on a table. And luckily I didn't fall over, but everybody knew what had happened. And that night I called my wife and said, I got a drinking problem, I've got to stop. But I couldn't, I wouldn't, however you want to put that, I didn't. And so things went on, and we went public successfully, and at that time, the investment bankers wanted me to move to New York. And I said, I'm not doing that. I said I would never move to New York. I feel like once you've lived in Florida and you've had winters down here, you don't ever want to live back in the Northeast again. And I said I wouldn't, and I didn't. And so I left. After a little over 2 years, I bought a small double drive-through hamburger chain whose founder had died, and his wife was running the company, and she was the operations person. She really knew what she was doing. But he was the person who found new sites and did the finances and that sort of thing. And when he died, she felt like the company was a little bit rudderless. They had begun to franchise, but not done a lot. And by then, franchising had kind of become my expertise. So I bought the company and moved it from the west coast of Florida to the east coast of Florida and started franchising it myself. And grew that company through acquisitions, franchising, and new openings to 62 in 2 years, and went public myself. And what I haven't talked about, except for that one ego issue with that girl, was that my ego's growing this whole time, bigger and bigger and bigger. And as my alcohol consumption grew, I allowed my ego to grow along with it. And the day we went public, we had a big party at my office in Fort Lauderdale, and it was a formal party. We invited everybody that was important. Mayor of Fort Lauderdale came and gave me the key to the city, there's balloons, champagne, the whole 9 yards, and I announced to the press that I was running for president, long before Donald Trump. I was drunk. I wasn't born in the United States. It was my ego talking completely. And thankfully, nobody took me seriously and thought I was joking. And when I realized what I had done the next day, I was very happy that nobody took me seriously. But that was where my ego had gone. And so if you fast forward from there, my life really started going downhill. I was spending horrendous amounts of money. I was not treating my family well. I was embarrassing my family, embarrassing my son constantly. As he was growing up, he became an athlete, and I would go to his football games. And I recall very clearly one day showing up at a football game of his, a Pop Warner game in Coral Springs, and it was pouring rain, and I show up in a suit. There's no reason for me to be in a suit, but I show up in a suit, and he wasn't playing well, and I walked on the field and grabbed him by the shoulder pads and pulled him off because he wasn't playing well. Embarrassed him in front of all his friends, and it was at that moment that I remembered being in the dugout, being horrified by what my father was doing to me, and I realized I'd become my father. And he moved out of the house at 12 years old. He moved in with a woman who worked for my wife. her son was his best friend, and he moved in with that family and wouldn't come home until I was gone. And that was really, in retrospect, the beginning of me sinking to my worst and then actually coming back, because not too long after that, my wife had me Baker Acted, and at the Baker Act, it was recommended I go to treatment, and I did. And I was in treatment for 9 days in detox, 28 days of residential. I came home and stayed sober 5 days. Started drinking outside of AA meetings. I have to say, I drank inside AA meetings at times. My wife caught me doing it when she found a big gulp cup full of vodka in my car. And 2 months after that, she went to court to have me Marchman acted. Now, if you don't know anything about the Marchman Act, is when someone believes that you are a danger to yourself or society, and they go to court in the state of Florida, and they have the judge decide whether to remand you to treatment or not. I showed up to the hearing. I was drunk. I defended myself, which obviously is foolish, but if I'm drinking, I mean, of course I'm going to make stupid decisions. And when the judge remanded me to treatment, I had the arrogance and the gall to say, "I approve, Your Honor," as if I had a say in the matter. And so I was off to my second treatment. And same place. At that point in my life, I didn't know there was such a thing as private treatment. I thought all there was state and county run places. I'm back in the same place, and I'm there for probably 7 days of detox and a month of residential. And during this period, I couldn't get a hold of my wife. She never returned my call. She never picked up the phone when I called the house. She didn't come to Family Days. Therapists couldn't get a hold of her. Excuse me. I had an inkling something was going on. And when it came to my last day, there was nobody there to pick me up to take me home. And so the treatment center was in Coral Springs, and I lived in Coral Springs. And so I walked home, and wouldn't you know, I walked past the Walgreens. And of course, it was my favorite Walgreens to buy liquor. And I bought a bottle of vodka and was drunk before I got home. And just like in a movie, I opened the door to my house, and we had a beautiful 5-bedroom, 4.5 bath house, and there was nothing in it. It was like the door creaking like in a horror movie. All that was left was an easy chair, one of those big box TVs, and I thought to myself, wow, I've won the lottery. And that's the way I thought in those days. And I've thought back on my life, my sober life, my drunken life, and that was really a turning point for me, because I drank myself to a point of nearly dying. In the next 6 weeks, I lost 65 pounds because all I did was drink. My wife would come by about every third day with a bag of M&Ms, and she'd hand feed me peanut M&Ms because she knew I wasn't eating anything else. So I lost 65 pounds, all my toenails fell out, and I was yellow. And after about 6 weeks, she came in one day, and I opened the book as she came in, and the book said 100 feet to the ocean. I thought, wow, how bad could that be? It's 100 feet to the ocean. And that's how I came to my sobriety. I went to visit it. She went with me. She cared enough to help me to get sober. And so there was a waiting list to get in, because the Beachcomber is only 16 beds and it's very small. And so I went on a Friday to look at it. I couldn't get in until Wednesday. And like most good alcoholics, I decided that I was going to drink myself stupid and go out, with a bang. And so that's what I did. I drank till 5 o'clock in the morning that day. And she and I showed up to the front parking lot of the Beachcomber at about 8:30, and the owner came out and took one look at me, and he said, you can't come here. I don't have the facility to take care of you. You need a higher level of care, like detox. And detox may not even take you. You might have to go to the hospital. And to my wife's credit, she would not take no for an answer. She cried, begged, pleaded, cried, pleaded, begged for about 45 minutes until finally the owner said, okay, I'll do it. And her response after he said that was, in 2 weeks, he'll be running the place. And it took longer than that, but eventually that did happen. But I went to the Beachcomber. I was a terrible patient. I almost got thrown out a couple of times. You know, they did a lot of spiritual work there, and I didn't know anything about spirituality or spiritual anything or religion or God or anything. I thought I was God. I thought we were all each our own gods. And so I clashed with the therapist a lot. I got along with the patients fine, but I knew better than the therapist. My ego was still killing me. And one day a therapist came to me and said, Tony, if you don't get this God thing, you're not going to make it. You're going to die. And I had come to the conclusion that I didn't want to die. And so I started acting as if. And the Beachcomber teaches something called toothbrush therapy, which is 5 things you do every day to stay sober. Pray and meditate. Go to a meeting every day. Talk to another alcoholic every day or addict. Read 4 pages of positive literature and do a gratitude list every day. And so the prayer and meditation part I knew nothing about, but I started doing it because I didn't want to die. And over a very short period of time, some things happened at the Beachcomber where I had some confrontations with therapists that the result of that, and I don't need to get into the details of it other than to say it was all my fault. There was nothing physical or anything like that, but I basically cursed out a therapist, and it was all over my ego. And I almost got thrown out, but the clinical director said, why don't you go back to your room and pray and meditate? And at that point in my life, the only thing I knew about prayer was that you did it on your knees, and I didn't know anything about meditation. And I went to my room, and I got on my knees, and I just asked God to take away the anger. And I laid in bed, and I did what I thought was meditation, and I came back for the next group. And another client said to me, so are you okay? I said, what do you mean? Well, you kind of flipped out before. And I couldn't remember why I flipped out, or even that I'd flipped out. And he reminded me, and it was the first time I had a fleeting thought that the therapist knew more than I did. And a week later, I had another confrontation with that same therapist. And I flipped out on him again. But this time nobody had to tell me to go pray and meditate. And I went and did that, and it worked again. And suddenly I was sold. Suddenly, you know, for that to happen 2 times in a row, I thought there's something to this. And I started now attacking my budding sobriety with zest, with, you know, I want to be sober, so let me do what I'm supposed to do and let me just shut up and listen. And so that's what I started to do. And about week 3, I'm really doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And I walked out of the door coming out onto the lawn one day, and all of a sudden the grass seemed greener and the sky seemed bluer, and the birds, all of a sudden I heard birds. I'm like, I didn't know we had birds here. It was like a light bulb had gone on, and it was the beginning of my journey. And I came to realize that a relationship with a higher power was a big part of what I needed to have. And so I worked on that, and I went to meetings. And when I first got out, you know, I divested myself of my company, and I just concentrated on staying sober. And boredom was a very bad thing for me. So I went to meeting after meeting. There were days I went to 5 meetings. But 90 and 90 was something that I blew away. I think I did something like 230 meetings in 90 days. Because I knew if I went home and had nothing to do, it was likely I was going to drink. And so about that therapist that I clashed with so much, about 6 months after I got out of the Beachcomber, he and I started to become friendly, and he started to feed me new people coming out of the Beachcomber as sponsees. And you know, some of them did pretty well, so he and I became friendlier and friendlier. And you fast forward, 15 years later, I become his therapist. And, when he was started to have physical problems, I was his emergency contact at the hospital. I was the person who had kind of reversed things with him. And that wasn't about me. That was about him. That was about Alcoholics Anonymous. That was about sobriety. It was about God and me embracing God. And when he died, I was probably the closest person to him that wasn't one of his kids. And so, that he actually spoke at my wife's, my current wife, her and my wedding, and he spoke about those confrontations. And but I should tell you that in between, when I came out of treatment, I had nowhere to go. I had this empty house I could go live in, but my wife had bought another house in order to get my son to move back in. And she bought the house a couple of blocks from the house I was living in. And she convinced him that to give me a chance, that I had nowhere else to go, that, give him a couple of weeks to find somewhere to go. And to my son's credit, he gave me that chance. And I never looked back, and he never looked back. And other than his own son, I think if you asked him who his best friend in the world is today, I think he'd say me. So sobriety helped me repair that relationship, and it helped me repair the relationship with my first wife. But as I was sober and she saw me as a sober person, we knew we shouldn't be together, and so we decided to get divorced. And I acted, for all intents and purposes, as her attorney in the divorce. That's how amicable it was. And, I didn't even move out of the house for about a year and a half. And so, during that period of time, I decided I could never go back to the restaurant business. And I started to see what therapists did. When I was a patient at the Beachcomber, I saw what therapists did. And that was something that jumped out. And I thought, I'm a bleeding heart. I could do that. I love to help people. And so I went back to school. And I went back to school, I believe it was 2005, and I took one class just because at 48 years old, I didn't think I could hack being in college again. And I took that class and did well in it. And I said, okay, I'll take two the next semester. And I did well in it still. And in typical alcoholic fashion after that, it was, as hard, go at it as hard as I can. And so I ended up getting a double master's in mental health and rehab counseling, and met a woman while I was getting my master's who was a quadriplegic, who was a professor. She had gotten her PhD in a wheelchair, and she was a professor, needed 24-hour care, and she was able to accomplish that. And she inspired me, and she said to me, Tony, now that you got master's degrees, are you going to get a PhD? And I said, PhD? I'll be 60 by the time I have it. And she said, you could be 60 with a PhD or 60 without one. It's up to you. And so I said, okay. And I actually got it at 58. But along the way, I met my wife. After the divorce, my first wife and I both started dating, and I started dating my wife, who's KJ. And we met at an AA meeting. I like to say she 13-stepped me. She'd probably say I 13-stepped her, but let's just say fate put us together, and we started dating in November of 2009 and got married in June of 2010. And it was magic from the beginning. From the very first date, I knew that it was going to be a serious relationship, and it's been magic all along. And along the way, KJ, who had a great job at the Boca Resort, but also had a master's in mental health in her back pocket, I convinced her to come to work at the Beachcomber, because you see, I did my internship at the Beachcomber, became a therapist at the Beachcomber, opened up their IOP, opened up their PHP, and ultimately became the program director there in two of the three, and then finally in residential about 4 years ago. And she came along and she got her own PhD, and you all know how accomplished she is now. And I would tell you this with no qualms, KJ is a much better therapist than I am. and I'm very proud of everything she's accomplished, including this. And so, one of the things that came with being married to KJ is that her parents gave us a trip anywhere we wanted to go in the world for a cruise early in our marriage. They did that for each of their kids, and we went on a cruise through the Mediterranean. And one of the stops was Saint-Tropez in the south of France. And we fell in love with the place, and we thought, wow, this is a special place. Wouldn't it be great if we could retire here? Never thinking it was possible for us to do that. And so every couple of years we'd take this similar cruise, and we'd either go to Saint-Tropez to either be part of it, or Portofino in Italy would be part of it, Monte Carlo, Marseille always seemed to be part of it, but we loved that part of the world. And this year we were scheduled to go on our cruise in April, and we were so busy in our private practice. We have a private practice also, and at the Beachcomber and her with her YouTube videos, that we canceled our cruise, and I said, let's go to Paris for the weekend. And so we did. And of course, only alcoholics go to Paris for the weekend, even if we haven't had a drink in a long time. So we flew to Paris on a Thursday night, had the most phenomenal time in Paris, and I think it was Saturday afternoon. We were walking down a street, and I said, why don't we retire to Paris? And she was thinking the same thing at the same time. And so on October 16th, my 20th anniversary of sobriety, and one day after my 20th anniversary of walking into the Beachcomber, I'm retiring, she's semi-retiring, she's only going to do the YouTube channel and no private practice, and of course neither one of us working at the Beachcomber, because she's the clinical director and the family program director, and I'm the program director. So the Beachcomber, which accounts for about 85, 90 hours a week between the two of us, and it varies which way it is on any given week. Anyway, a lot of time, that won't be there anymore. And we'll be able to do what we want to do on our own schedule, which is something I've wanted to do for a long time. So some of you may have been following the videos every week of our progress in getting to France, and I speak my story to you on September 5th, and we're now inside 6 weeks. We're looking forward to going. We're giving away a lot of stuff. We've given away a lot of stuff, and we can't wait. We're looking for a great retirement. And I think I'll end there and say God bless you to all of you. And if you're someone who's in recovery, I hope that you have a great recovery. I know that I'm going to do my best to have the best recovery I can have. Thank you. Goodbye.